Next up, we have Seaking. This ocean royalty has been around since the first generation, regularly seen splashing around wherever there is water in the early games and seasons of the anime alike. Its prominence really helps flesh out and bring to life the aquatic world of Pokemon. It's also got some intriguing Pokedex entries, specifically those that refer to how groups of Seaking color rivers red when they gather. Finally, it's one of the few Pokemon with its own meme, which is a legacy not even most legendaries can boast. Its pre-evolution Goldeen is also in Smash, technically, if you happen to be unlucky when you throw a Pokeball. Though I think if I wanted to see a useless fish out of my Pokeball, I would have preferred Magikarp. I mean, Goldeen actually gets useful attacks before it evolves, so yeah, there's that. Today we're going to examine if Seaking was as regal as its name would suggest in the competitive scene, or if it flopped like a fish. And so, we ask, how good was Seaking actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Seaking is so stunningly mediocre, it's actually amazing. Competitively speaking, it is the epitome of the most nondescript generic water Pokemon possible. In fact, it's as if it was designed to be the most forgettable water type possible. Its move pool and stats were impossibly bland. So they weren't terrible, but they weren't exactly good either. And as a result, Seaking was outclassed by, well, pretty much every other fully evolved water in the game. It had nary a niche even all the way down in NU, outclassed by even the lowliest waters in that tier, Seadra and Poliwhirl. There was simply nothing Seaking could do in any Gen 1 format. It was the king of nothing, left to watch from the sidelines as its royal pedigree was usurped by Kingler Baratheon and its Crabhammer. Gen 2 accentuated the comparison to Kingler even further by giving Seaking Swords Dance, which seemed mocking given how Seaking was completely and utterly inferior in such a role, ensuring that, once again, it wouldn't be able to find a niche even in NU. Not only was there an enormous disparity between their attack stats, Kingler also outpaced Seaking by quite a decent margin, thus having the edge on it with the two most important traits for a Swords Dancer. It was almost cruel. Swords Dance Seaking was a decent Pokemon against the metagame in its own right, but seeing as you were just handicapping yourself by using it instead of Kingler, nobody did. Now sure, Seaking has some advantages over Kingler. It could go for a double boost set by running agility in conjunction with Swords Dance, or it could use Surf, which hit harder than Kingler's. Its improved Special Bulk was also quite helpful in taking Hidden Power Electrics from Xatu, Dugong, and Octillery. But the problem was that these advantages, while certainly nice, were ultimately minor compared to Kingler's vastly superior attack and speed, which were more salient in consistently allowing it to set up and sweep. Once again, Seaking was seeking a throne, but wound up a sea peasant instead. The Smogon analysis for Gen 3 Seaking is over a decade and a half old at this point. However, its opening line still rings true, succinctly summarizing Seaking's sorry situation. Quote, Seaking is cool, but unfortunately bad, end quote. It really is as simple as that. Gen 3 gave Seaking some fun tools to play around with for sure. It got Swift Swim, allowing it to threaten a sweep with a Rain Dance set, while its coverage was improved with the Grass-type Shearing Megahorn. The addition of Pinch Berries meant it could also try a Flail set with Lychee Berry attached, and it could use Water Veil as its ability, giving it an immunity to Will-O-Wisp. Seaking also hit harder now with Gen 3 changing the EV system and every Pokemon no longer packing maximum bulk by default. Sadly, as fun as these sets were, they simply weren't at all good. Once again, not even in NU. Funnily enough, Swords Dance Seaking probably would have been at least decent, as boosted Megahorns would have ripped through the tier's common defensive Pokemon in Trimeco and Blossom. Sadly, Seaking lost Swords Dance in the generational shift. It is difficult to not see this as another wanton act of cruelty from Game Freak, to give it Megahorn but take away from it the power boosting option is so desperately needed alongside it. Choice Band just wasn't the same, as locking into one move and losing leftovers were not a worthwhile trade-off for Seaking. As a result, our fishy friend languished in sub-NU obscurity for the third consecutive generation. At least it could somewhat enjoy the fact that Kingler struggled in the tier as well. It was small comfort, but Seaking had to take what very little it could get. Gen 4's new physical special split allowed Seaking to use Stab off of its much higher attack stat and added Life Orb, allowing it to boost its power while still being able to switch between moves. Damp Rock also meant Seaking's teammates could also set up extended range for a sustained Savage Swift Swim sweep. Sadly, Seaking's stats still sucked stupendously. As a result, it once again was outclassed by just about every other water type all the way down in NU. Even something as lowly as Lumineon at least had speed, safeguard, and U-turn, making for a decent Rain Dance supporter. Seaking was just entirely outclassed, unless you were using like a Misty themed team or something. That could be fun, of course, but you didn't want to do that if your primary goal was to win. Seaking and being competitive just didn't go fin and fin. Matter of fact, Seaking couldn't go fin at all, since its competitive career never actually started. The saying is usually there's always a bigger fish, but in Seaking's case, everything was a bigger fish. Seaking got a great tool from Gen 5's Dream World, an improved Lightning Rod ability, which now granted an electric type immunity as well as a special attack boost if it was hit with an electric move. A water type loves being immune to electric as opposed to being weak to it. Unfortunately, Seaking was far from the only water type with this trait, and all of those other waters were far, far better than it. Once again, even a tiny NU niche eluded it. If you wanted to use a Mega Horn spamming water type, you would just use Samurott, which was one of the very best Pokemon in the tier. All its stats besides special defense were better than Seaking's indeed. The power creep introduced by each generation served to gradually make Seaking's stats more and more pathetic by comparison. To add insult to injury, Samurott packed the move that had been taken from Seaking, Swords Dance. Of course, even if Samurott didn't exist, Seaking wouldn't get used. It was just so ridiculously weak, slow, and frail. Having 2 of those 3 traits is a death knell for viability, let alone 3. Seaking lost to the entire tier more or less. For the first time, its complete lack of usage was accurately reflected in its tiering placement. No longer was it never used even in never used, as it finally dropped to untiered, where it had belonged all along. The 6th generation gave Seaking some brief glimpses of hope. No, not a mega evolution, though Arceus knows it needed one, but some hope nonetheless. First, it received a buff knockoff, allowing it to actually cripple switch-ins reliably, and second, there was now PU, a tier below even NU. Finally, Seaking could potentially do something. With Lightning Rod giving it an electric immunity alongside its resistance to Blizzard, it could check one of the 2 best Pokemon in the tier, Rotom Frost, as well as Stonewalling Zebstrika. At long last, Seaking had found a... just kidding. It was thoroughly outclassed by Eviolite Chinchou, who was far bulkier on the special side, gave its teammates easy switch-in opportunities via Volt Switch, spread burns with Scald, shrugged off Rotom burns with Rest, and remained useful while sleeping with Sleep Talk. Chinchou's flying resistance and access to Stab Electric allowed it to completely counter Swanna as well. Seaking's knockoff was nice, but not nearly enough to make it worth ever using over Chinchou. It was just poorer on every single front. Once again, Seaking wound up in the untiered fish tank, so close yet so far from viability. If Seaking couldn't keep up in Gen 6 PU, you might not be surprised to hear that it didn't stand a ghastly of a chance in the massively power-crept Gen 7 iteration of the tier. Before, it was outclassed by Chinchou, and now it was outclassed by Lantern. At least it was outclassed by a fully evolved Pokemon this time. Yes, that was Seaking's threshold for improvement. At least this time around, Seaking wouldn't have been successful in the tier no matter what. In the previous generation, had Chinchou not been around, it would have been alright, but now it stood no chance. This way, when Seaking received the inevitable boot to untiered, the blow stung less. At least it hadn't been teased with hope. At this point, Seaking considered being spared of such cruelty to be a win. Seaking is obviously not the biggest fish in the pond in VGC either, but it at least has some usage, as a very, very niche Lightning Rod user. Seaking's electric immunity due to Lightning Rod makes it one of 5 Pokemon with access to the ability, alongside Raichu, Togedemaru, and both Marowak forms. And Rhyhorn. While Seaking is usually much worse than any of these alternatives save maybe base Marowak, it did have a niche as a Lightning Rod user who wasn't weak to ground moves, as well as being one of the few Pokemon who could use the special attack boost effectively. Guido Michaelis demonstrated just what a well-trained Seaking could do at the 2017 Buenos Aires special event, which took place towards the end of the format. Guido was looking for ways to handle the abundance of Tapu Koko, ever a threat in 2017. But the only real ground type in the format was Garchomp, who struggled with Dazzling Gleam. As such, Guido turned to Lightning Rod and used Seaking as his Tapu Koko counter. Seaking, odd fish that it is, fit Guido's needs for multiple reasons. First of all, it could outspeed Tapu Koko in Tailwind. Secondly, with the choice specs, it could sometimes one-hit KO Koko with Hydro Pump. Thirdly, its surprisingly good bulk let it tank Koko's Dazzling Gleam, managing to make the move a 3-hit KO even coming off of Life Orb. And lastly, it was a frickin' Seaking. No one knew what it would do, much less that it was going to be a Tapu Koko counter. Guido's Seaking came with the aforementioned choice specs and Hydro Pump, as well as a moveset of Surf, Ice Beam for dragons and grass mons, and Hidden Power Fire, which could take out opposing Kartana, which were also out in full force. He invested exactly enough speed to outspeed Jolly Pheromosa in Tailwind, while the rest of his EVs were dumped into special attack and then HP. He ended up placing 3rd at the special event, which isn't a bad outing for Seaking's one tournament result. Special thanks to Guido Michaelis at Redo VGC for the information. Gen 8 gave Seaking an excellent new move in Flip Turn. However, once again, its stats remain far too woeful for it to have accomplished anything at all, even all the way down in PU. For many Pokemon, they need a new move or two to find viability somewhere, but that's not the case with Seaking. It needs several stat boosts on top of multiple genuinely great moves to even start being thought of. Here's hoping that Seaking will receive something that let it finally gain some sort of singles niche at some point in Gen 8. Honestly, making this video felt almost sadistic. Rest assured, we do not not revel in it, and only hope that someone will finally give Seaking the buffs it deserves after all this time. However, Seaking got to go out for one last leap in the early days of 2020's online tournaments. Juan Mythos Boraguero used Seaking in one of the most audacious teams of the year, one that used Seaking's mediocre status as his secret weapon. Mythos used a squad of Seaking, Lapras, Dracovish, Gyarados, Tentacruel, and Urshifu. On the face of it, it's pretty clear what's going on here. It's a mono water team, right? Why else would you be using Seaking of all things unless you needed an electric immunity in mono water? Here's the thing though, this team is almost mono water, except it's Urshifu Dark. Yes, Urshifu is the secret not so fun surprise for Mythos' opponents. Again, I have to reiterate that Seaking was vital to this strategy, maybe even more than Urshifu itself. The very presence of such a usually useless mon convinced Mythos' opponent that he was running mono water, making Urshifu's unseen fist all the more literal. As for Seaking itself, Mythos built it full support, investing in its defenses and giving it Scald, Ice Beam, and Protect. Lightning Rod obviously helped keep his other 4 water types safe, but it was also a powerful tool in one specific matchup, the Lapras Ditto. Since many G-Max Lapras carried max lightning for coverage and to protect themselves from sleep, Mythos would run Seaking in the back against opposing Lapras, switching it into redirect moves, then get momentum with its own setup. For his last move, he chose Horn Drill, which could potentially drive through opposing stall teams. For reference, here's Mythos' only offensive calculation for Seaking in his team report. That just about says it all, no? Folks, I'm proud to tell you that Mythos made good on the royal part of Seaking's name. He won the second Circuito Galar qualifier, an online tournament with over 900 players. Seaking may not be the ruler of VGC, but it's got at least one crown. Oh yeah, and did I mention this whole team concept was inspired by One Piece's Water 7 arc? Yeah, a whole lot of passion can go a long way. And that's it. So we first asked how good was Seaking actually, but it quickly became apparent that was not the right question to ask. For maximum accuracy, we'd have to ask how bad was Seaking actually, which would then lead us to the answer: it was really, really, really bad. It wasn't even shockingly bad in the vein of a Ledion type Pokemon. It was just bad in the dullest way possible, which is even worse in its own way. At least something like Ledion or Rampardos is distinct in how terrible it is, whereas Seaking isn't even thought of. Given how Game Freak loves buffing Gen 1 Pokemon, it's even sadder that they've chosen to neglect Seaking for the entirety of its existence. That's 2.5 decades at this point. Hopefully they step it up in the very near future. But hey, at least in VGC it's got one crown. So I guess maybe things are looking up. Nah, probably not. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Seaking? What major buffs would you give it to have it even be thought of? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.